The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey, Sharon, I can't hear.
Sorry, guys. I had muted myself. Um, so I talked about Dell. Thank them for sponsoring us. I talked about SQL Saturday. And I'm just now talking about the past Community Summit, which will be happening on the first week of November this year in Seattle. If you sign up now, you can use the discount code VCSUM08 and you'll save $150 on your registration. Try to be there. It's great presentations, great parties. Seattle's lovely that time of year. This presentation is brought to you by the Database Administration Virtual Chapter. And there are a whole bunch of virtual chapters. If there are other virtual chapters that interest you, you can sign up at SQLpass.org and you'll get mailings from those virtual chapters just as you get mailings from this one. PASS is a volunteer organization. It's volunteers who do all of the work to make the organization happen. Yes, there's a paid staff in the headquarters, but it's those of us who are out here doing things like managing the virtual chapters who make all these things happen. Each month, there's an opportunity to nominate an outstanding volunteer award. You may have attended a DBA session moderated by Julie Bloomquist, and she was recently named as the Outstanding Volunteer of the Month. There's also a Passion Award, which is given yearly to a volunteer who has made significant contributions to PASS. The nominations for that will open, and the winner of that award will be announced at the summit. I'm assuming you're all members of PASS, but if not, you can sign up for a free membership today at sequelpass.org, and you can keep in touch via LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, whatever your drug of choice is. And now I'd like to introduce Jeff Garbus. He's responsible for those funny movies that you get to see while you're waiting. Usually you just get to look at a poll. So I think that was kind of a plus. He's a well-known author, lecturer, and consultant. He has years of experience. He's worked with SQL Server, Sybase, Oracle, and other databases. I've known Jeff in various capacities for a very long time, and I'm delighted that he's with us again. I think this is going to be a great presentation. He's a specialist in maximizing database performance, and he's the founder and CEO of Soaring Eagle Consulting. And without further ado, I'm going to give the screen back to Jeff and let him take over and do his thing.
Thank you very much, Sharon. I appreciate the very kind words, but every time you talk about how many years we've known each other, I feel just a little bit older. So I guess that's just part of being in this industry for a while, and thank you for remembering.
Yeah, and I still refer to myself as seasoned, so I don't sound quite so old.
Well, you know, my mother always says it beats the alternative. Anyway, moving on topic. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining this webinar. The topic is how to be a great production DBA. Every time I go to present this, I feel that it's a little bit arrogant to even be presenting on a topic like this. But every time I've done the presentation, it's been very successful. People have come to see this who have even more experience than I do. And I go back 30 plus years in database administration, which is a lot. This presentation came about a year and a half ago. We were asked by the Sybase group to put together a series of articles on how to be a Sybase DBA for Oracle DBAs, because at the time they were trying to get folks to move over to SAP. And as we put this together, we being a group of 3 of us, with a total amount of experience of almost 100 years in database administration, what we found was that there was a lot of commonalities in terms of being a production DBA, which really had nothing to do with the technology. They had to do with understanding the technology. They had to do with personality traits and characteristics. They had to do with communication skills and how and when and where and why to deal with the communication. So since then, we put together a SQL Server version of this presentation as well as an Oracle, and hopefully you enjoy it as well as the rest of the audiences have. This particular presentation was first done at the SQL Saturday in Puerto Rico about a year ago, and I've done it several times since. So sit back, relax. Because of the number of attendees, I am going to take questions at the end rather than as I'm going. So again, thank you in advance for your time. Hope you enjoyed the movies that we did. They're the brainchild of our marketing department. Soaring Eagle, I'm just going to spend less than 10 seconds on this. We are a consulting company specializing in performance tuning and managed services. As you saw from the cartoons, or may have inferred from the cartoons, one of our most rapidly growing business areas is remote database administration. We do not replace DBAs. We supplement them. We offer breadth and depth of knowledge in areas that you haven't been burnt in yet, as well as handling the overnights, deployments, upgrades, and weekend work. So, on to the presentation. We are going to be talking today specifically about a production DBA as opposed to a development DBA. There's almost 200 people connected right now, and if any of you have not heard this particular joke from one of your kids, then your kids probably have not gotten to binary yet. I have 4 kids, and on 4 separate occasions I had to laugh and say, that's a very funny joke, as opposed to, I was telling that when I was your age as well. And, back to the old days, Sharon. Anyway, we're going to separate this out into production DBAs and development DBAs. The way I draw the line is as follows. A production DBA is responsible for making sure that a production environment is up, stays up, is stable, performs well, and as changes are applied, we monitor and manage the changes, and as it grows, we monitor and manage the growth. We identify anomalies before they become a problem on a good day, and we identify them quickly if they're becoming a problem if the day is not as good a day. A development DBA works with developers. The developer DBA is the person who will help with the data modeling. We'll make fun of the developer's code, although production DBAs like to do that as well. We'll assist with training of the developers, although production DBAs will sometimes do that as well. We'll do code reviews, write stored procedures, define approaches that the production DBA will implement. This presentation specifically focuses on how to be a great production DBA, although there's certainly a little bit of carryover. From a stability point of view, we ask ourselves, what's the most important thing in a production environment? Well, the best definition I ever heard for a great production DBA was somebody you never know is around because nothing ever goes wrong. Now, I'm going to argue with that definition a little bit, but if you're going to define a great DBA or systems administrator or network administrator or you name it, that is a really good place to start. Just nothing ever goes wrong. Part of what we need to do in order to make sure nothing ever goes wrong is to make sure preventive maintenance, basic preventive maintenance happens. This includes everything from basic maintenance to monitoring. I'll go through the list that I like to use in a SQL Server environment. You're certainly welcome to pick up your own lists and add to it. What happens if we don't do basic maintenance? Well, one of the things that will happen frequently is that your performance becomes erratic and goes from erratic to bad. What would cause this? Well, maybe your indexes are becoming imbalanced. Maybe you have disk filling up. Maybe you have your log drives incrementing 1 meg at a time, and every time you end up with large tasks, your transaction logs are growing in tiny increments, but doing it thousands or hundreds of thousands of times. Next potential problem, database corruption. This does happen. Now, I've been doing SQL Server database administration for over 25 years now. Just aged myself again. And what I've found is that in the olden days, I should stop saying things like in the olden days we used to, but in the olden days we'd run DBCC. We would occasionally identify a corruption. We'd use DBCC to go in and fix it, and then we'd move on. And this would happen every once in a while. Every once in a while would be maybe every 6 to 12 months. And over the course of time, that's happened less and less and less. But here's the catch. 20 years ago, if I ran DBCC and I found a problem, chances are I uncovered an hitherto undiscovered server bug that was causing a page to be rewritten or unwritten or not written correctly. Today, one of the things that I've found happens more often is that a database corruption tends to be the onset of a hardware failure of one sort or another. When we find the database corruptions, obviously we're going to go fix the database corruption, but I will immediately ask all the hardware folks to do things like check memory, check storage, check the network, and just run their own tests on it because one tends to be a prelude to the other. We need to make sure that everything is up and stable because when the production server goes down, business stops. There are lots of other things that can happen when you're not doing this. So let's talk about the things that we need to do. When the servers host servers and database servers are not properly maintained, we get problems with performance, consistency, and things like the cleanup of ancillary processes. I do a lot of performance and tuning work at various client sites on a very regular basis. Let me restate that. In a given month, I might be at anywhere from 2 to 5 different unique client sites looking at different unique environments and problem sources. One of the things that I will always do is start with the big picture. I will put a monitoring tool on the server and I will ask the question, what's going on here? Do we have any bottlenecks at a high level? Is everything performing well? Am I performing all the preventive maintenance? Part of preventive maintenance also includes things like making sure MSDB gets cleaned out. I was at a client site several months ago where the MSDB was dramatically larger than their production database because it had been running for years and had simply never been cleaned out. Lack of preventive maintenance is probably the most common thing that will sting the new DBA. A lot of shops have combination developer DBAs, and they tend to be jacks of all trades. It's one of the things that we saw pop up on the survey briefly when it came up. And they tend to be given way too much, they tend to be overloaded, and they tend not to be given the time to do the proactive things that a full-time DBA would do. In addition, they're frequently not given the training and education that a full-time DBA gets, and they frequently haven't been burned by all the things that a full-time DBA gets. As a result, one of the first things I will check, even before I dig into, say, specific queries, is whether preventive maintenance is even set up on the server. Are we doing index rebuilds? Are we updating stats? Are we running DBCC? Are we cleaning up the ancillary processes? If that's not there, my expression is, there's your first problem. We also look for things like accurate stats. SQL Server has a cost-based optimizer. If your statistics are not up to date, once again, you're going to get inconsistent results and probably bad query plans. We'll also want to make sure that the storage is being used effectively. That's everything from having too many indexes to not enough. At a minimum, preventive maintenance on a SQL Server comprises backups, full and incremental. Whether you do a differential backup or not, I don't care. This is based on a business decision. One of the things that we'll talk about over the course of this hour, 45 minutes left, is that a lot of the work that we do is based on taking business requirements and applying them in a technical environment. If I'm taking a backup, well, from a technical standpoint, if I don't take a backup, people are going to point and laugh when the server crashes and the company goes out of business. I don't want that to happen. But how often do we do the backups? How often do we do incrementals? There are a lot of things in play there, from how much time do we have to do the backups to how long will it take to do a restore. And we'll talk about that again in a few minutes. Index maintenance. For, the first 10 years or so of both SQL Server and Sybase, the official party line was that B-tree type indexes are self-maintaining, self-balancing, you name it. But from a practical standpoint, there are a variety of ways they can become imbalanced. With the onset of row-level locking, which came about around SQL Server, I think around SQL Server 2000, the DBMS began taking shortcuts in the way the physical pages were managed and implemented in order to speed up the disadvantage from a performance standpoint of the row-level locking. And as a result, the need to do things like reorgs and rebuilds are even more important. Database consistency checker. I'm going to use the phrase in the olden days again. In the olden days, DBCC was a tech support only tool used when there was an issue identified by tech support to go in and make sure the database was doing everything it was supposed to, that all the pages were linked, that there was no corruption or referential integrity problems in the system tables. Over the course of a relatively short period of time, that became standard maintenance. Today, I still like running that. If you ever look at your maintenance wizard, you'll see a DBCC step. I strongly disapprove of having that skipped. We'll talk about ways of speeding that up in a few minutes. Clean up MSDB, older files. And when you're looking at your wizard, avoid the database shrink step. I'm not sure why that's in there as a standard type of step. I suspect that some large group of the user community said, hey, we do this a lot, and Microsoft said, okay, if you want it, you've got it. From a practical standpoint, our data requirements rarely decrease. They almost always are on the increase. As a result, we need to be able to grow the files that the database resides on. When we grow a little bit too fast or too far, if I've got a 2 terabyte database and somehow my log grew to 4 terabytes because I did an update on every single table, I'm going to want to go and shrink that manually. But from a practical standpoint, when we do the auto grow, there's a lot of locking, blocking, and waiting on, or contention on the client side while waiting for the growth to happen. So we don't want to do an automatic shrink. What we want to do is size these appropriately before we get in there. We talked briefly about the cost-based optimizer. The idea behind this is that there's a relational myth. The relational myth is you don't tell the server how to get the data, you tell it what data you want and the server figures out how to get it. Well, what makes that true is A, the ability to do a table scan, and B, the ability to create an index to avoid the table scan and get at the data faster. The question becomes, do we do a table scan or use an index? For those of you who've seen my indexing presentation, you know that one might be better than the other in a very dramatic way. In order to determine what we're going to do, the cost-based optimizer will identify the distribution of the data. It has a built-in a histogram, a statistics histogram. Tells us what that layout looks like. And it also gives us the ability to cost it and estimate how long it's going to take for a table scan, index A, index B, combinations, join orders, you name it. If those statistics become out of date, you've got a problem. One of the other things that you need to look at as we're thinking about stats and updates and index rebuilds, index fragmentation. We'll get to that in just a minute. High volume environments are going to need this. Well, let's talk about high volume small environments and high volume large environments. When we're talking high volume environments, what we're really talking about is rate of change of the data. If I've got 2 terabytes of data and it's changing at the rate of 10 records a day, 10 rows a day, no statistics change is ever going to make a difference. If I've got a 2 gigabyte database and I'm adding 100 megabytes a day, well, now I'm making dramatic changes to the data and the distribution of the data is going to change. Now, some environments, I may have 2 gigabytes of data and all of it changes over the course of a day. What you need to do are a couple of things. First, you need to identify how often your environment is changing. How volatile is the data? How volatile is the distribution and the layout of the data? And if necessary, update the stacks as often as necessary. Stats can be updated in one of 2 ways. First is manual. I always have in my plans manual updates of the statistics. Always, always, always. What I've begun doing more recently, there's a bunch of scripts that Ola Hollengren has written. I think they're being used by most of the Fortune 50 at this point. And what the scripts will do, and there are other versions of these scripts out there, is take a look at an index, check the fragmentation level, and or the volatility level, and only update the stats if in fact it needs it, or only update the index if in fact it needs it. This is a highly recommended approach. There is also on each database an option. If you right-click on the server and then open up the databases, right-click on the database in Management Studio, there's an option there which is Auto Update Statistics. What that does in theory is when you have a database and server with relatively low utilization, it will automatically update the stats based on what's in the tables. Most people do not have low volume environments, they have high volume environments, and there are no idle CPU cycles in which to do this, or in which to do it sufficiently. or I should do it for 2 terabytes of data. So auto update, I assume it's not going to work, and in fact I will occasionally just turn it off and deal with the manual update stats. I will watch for fragmentation in high volume situations, because there are a couple of places where we will do these dynamically during the day on demand. A couple of quick tips. First, with the advent of about SQL 2005, I think, we've got the ability to do a sampling. If you have a 2 terabyte table, scanning that table is not going to be a sub-second activity. Note that you can use a sampling amount on your update stats. When you go to do this, specify it. I had a friend in engineering about the time this became available, and what he told me was that while performing a TPC-C benchmark, that is a financial industry benchmark, it may or may not relate to the type of load you've got, but while running one of those benchmarks, they found they got the same effective query plans with a 10% sampling that they got with 100% sampling. I tell people that a good DBA is a professional paranoid, and as a result, I start with 25%. I don't go down to 10% when I have tables that are too large to update stats on live. Do update the stats as often as you can afford it. Also, do rebuild and or reorg your indexes as part of your basic maintenance. Once again, with the advent of about SQL 2000 row-level locking, this became even more important. Once again, you can identify what the fragmentation level is of the index and choose to rebuild individual indexes, as opposed to necessarily doing all the rebuilds for all the tables in all of your databases all at once. Next, do validate your database consistency. Run the database consistency checker. Sorry, taking a drink. Allergy is really bad down here in Florida at the moment. Database consistency checker makes sure that your database is clean, no torn pages, no bad links. A lot of shops simply do not do this. We do strongly recommend that you don't age your database backups out without performing a DBCC. We have a case study, a client of ours, a current client of ours, a very, a reasonably sized healthcare organization, about 1,500 employees, had their primary database become corrupt. Here was the problem. It became corrupt in November. They found that all of their backups were also corrupt. Moving backwards, they realized that their last good backup was mid-March. Think about that. Insurance company, HIPAA requirements, SARBOX requirements. If there's a regulation or a regulatory agency, it hits insurance carriers. They just lost all of their production data due to a corrupt database. Where do you go from there? When we got in touch with them, they had already furloughed 1,200 of their 1,400 to 1,500 employees. We were able to recover from the disaster, but please learn from their mistake. They almost went under because they weren't taking good care of their data. Record your runtime data, another strong, important thing to do. This is something that if you're a SQL Server DB and you've never seen Sybase, the SP configure may be relatively new to you. However, what you can do is run an SP configure, and what that will do is give you a list of all your config variables. So as you right-click on your server name and you start asking questions like, are we going to use all of our memory? Are we going to use some of our memory? What are we going to turn on and off? The idea here is that in case of an emergency, I want to be able to rebuild my server from scratch, and I want to be able to do it in a hurry, and I want to be able to get it up to a consistent state. Now, some shops will be running a cluster here in Tampa. They will have Always On running, and they'll have a hot recovery site in Atlanta or New York or Salt Lake City. but not all of them do. We have a financial services company as a customer that runs credit card payments. They're not even clustered. What happens if their server fails? Well, they do have some warm standby and they can recover relatively quickly. But guess what? If both go down at the same time, and I have seen that happen, you need to be able to rebuild from scratch. You need to be able to do it fast. The Great DBA pays attention to application performance. The reason for that is when things slow down, everybody will come over to the Production DBA and ask, sorry, still allergies. Yes, why are we running slowly? What are you doing? Who's doing what? Where is it? When the application's running slowly, everybody's upset. One common mistake is simply throw hardware at the problem. This is a CIO's favorite solution. Why? It's often cheaper to throw hardware at the solution than to throw people at solving the problem. It certainly solves it faster. Why? Well, according to industry numbers coming from Gartner Group, Forrester Group, and a couple of others, mean time to resolution to solve a problem includes 6 phone calls from user to help desk and out, and then 80% of the problem, 80% of the resolution time is simply identifying the problem. If you know what the problems are already and you have a tool that can help you identify it, you're way ahead of the curve, and when it gets to, hey, things are running slowly, you can say, I know, I'm working on it, I have a solution that I'm proposing, as opposed to, oh, well, tell me a little bit about it. I hate tuning through anecdotes because it's just slow. I did it for 20 years, and about 5 or 10 years ago, I started using tools, and I love the tools because it finds the problems fast. So throwing hardware at problems simply masks the problem generally, causes it to snowball and get much worse and hit you much harder when it finally hits. If you have 12 processors, you bring it up to 24 processors, well, guess what? When 2 weeks from now you hit 100% of 24 processors, you hadn't solved the problem, and at some point the ability to upgrade hardware becomes diminished. Hopefully, if your CIO ever throws hardware at a problem, you will immediately begin investigating why we needed to throw hardware at the problem. Also be aware, in a lot of organizations, the ability to make changes to the application is slow. I was at a large insurance company in Salt Lake City a few years ago. I went in and they said, Jeff, we have a very small window to upgrade from version A to version B. If we can get this resolved in the next 2 to 3 weeks, we can go. Otherwise, we have to wait for a year. The biggest problem they had was that one of their queries was really slowly performing on the new version of the server. So as we investigated it, their 2-minute query was taking, well, it was timing out at about 3 hours. When I looked at it, I said, all right, I can see what the problem is. This is a known bug, and it is resolved at some point in a future release. However, watch this. I rewrote the query, and it was coming back sub-second. The heck with the 3 hours, the heck with 2.5 minutes, make this minor change, verify that we're getting the same result sets back, and we were, and now your results are 1 second. They said to me, Jeff, I've got 3 weeks to get this release out. If I can, great. But to make even that minor code change, I have a minimum of an 8-week window. That is why CIOs want to solve it with hardware. The Great DBA has a disaster recovery plan. The Great DBA always asks himself, how can the plan go wrong? What are my points of failure? As we start looking around, we look at servers, we look at storage, we look at location, we look at environment, we look at power, we look at internet lines, we look at you name it. We build a disaster plan, we even test it. Here's my recommendation before completing your disaster plan. Find the practical joker in your group. Every group's got one. Sometimes you know who they are, and sometimes you don't. If you don't, Well, ask around. Or ask me. I'm a good practical joker. Ask the practical joker, if you were to find a hole in my disaster recovery plan, where would it be? And let that person go through it and say, well, I would toss a hand grenade into this room. I'm not making that one up, by the way. I have been at places where a hand grenade was tossed into the server room, where halon was hit, where a fire axe was taken to a network server that wasn't backed up, where fires and floods hit. Take a look at all the environmental possibilities where a backhoe took out the internet lines. You name it, you need at least to address the possibility of what you would do if things went wrong. If you do not have a written disaster recovery plan, you do not have a recovery plan. If you do not have a written disaster recovery plan that somebody can follow if you are on vacation, you do not have a disaster recovery plan. This written recovery plan should be tested extensively and often. Often does not mean every week, but certainly once a quarter to a couple of times a year. Find your junior DBA, drop the DR plan in his or her lap, and say, run it. In a test environment. Make sure they're not running this in your production environment, although in a lot of environments we do require the test of automatic failover on a periodic basis. This does two things. First, it gives your less experienced DBA the experience of running through test plans, installations, failovers. It is great practice and great training. Next, it makes sure that somebody else can read your written test plan. Sometimes, and I've been writing for years. I've got 17 or 18 published books at this point. I've written hundreds of magazine articles, e-books, e-briefs, you name it. But you know what? I will sometimes write something and later I'll read it and I'll ask myself, how in the world could you have written something that bad? And then I'll rewrite it. Make sure that somebody else knows exactly what you had in mind and test that. The Great DBA not only runs database backups, the Great DBA tests the restore to make sure that the restore works. This is really important. I can't tell you how many times I've talked to it. It's never happened to me personally, but I've talked to literally dozens of DBAs who've had restore fails in critical situations. Why would a restore fail? I just did an upgrade and I can't restore the backup from the old server to the new one. It fails. The tape that I was storing things on went bad. The tape was stored near a magnet. The tape was an inch short. Excuse me. The disk that I'm storing this to was corrupted. Oops, I guess I was backing up to the same storage device that just failed that my database was residing on. Backups sometimes fail. Get the backup to a secure remote location. If your backup is stored on the same site you're in, you do not have a backup. You have your fingers crossed. Because when your building floods, when it gets struck by lightning, when you name it, you're in trouble. Get it off site. Track and maintain a record of the backups. That way when somebody says, I need a restore from last week to test, you know where they are, you know where to find them. And by the way, when you're testing your restore, test a restore of one of the off-site backups. Very important. How often should we back up? Really a business decision. What you need to do is to understand two things. How long does it take to perform a backup? How long does it take to perform a restore? Historically, a restore has taken 2 to 3 times the length of the backup, but that really is very hardware dependent. It could be approximately the same amount of time. It depends how fast you're handling the writes and how fast you can get the information off the data that you are restoring from. Also, you have to be able to answer the question, how much data can we afford to lose? Now, generally, when you go to a CIO, that's usually a decision maker in that area, although sometimes it's a business owner, not a technical person. You ask the question, how much data can you afford to lose? And their answer is uniformly none. We can't afford to lose any data. Design a system that will not ever let us lose a byte of data, guaranteed. And you know what? We go out there, we create clusters, we network the clusters across multiple environments and multiple locations, and we get to the point where it would really take an extreme series of disasters that have never happened historically in order to hurt the system. But guess what? People make mistakes. Databases become corrupt. Junior DBA inadvertently truncates a production table instead of a development table. All these things happen. So we still need to take backups of the database, and we still need to be able to test those restores. Now, the transaction log backup, also called an incremental backup, is the way that we say, all right, we've got a 2 terabyte database. We can't back that up every 5 minutes to have a 2.5 minute median loss of data, loss of time. So the transaction log is a way of saying, just record the changes that have been made to the database since the last full backup or the last transaction log backup. Note this is very different from the differential backups. What does this do for us? This gives us the ability to take small backups every 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever you pick for your median time, and store those. Remember, we also need to store these off-site. We need to collect them. We need to put them in a place not on our production server. That gives us the ability to restore to another server if, in fact, things crash, there's an absolute disaster, and we need to, recover our customer table, recover our order table, recover our, you name it. The transaction logs must be monitored and backed up. The only way we clean out those backups is with that transaction log incremental backup. You don't do it, they will grow. I have seen 200 megabyte databases with 20 gigabyte transaction logs. That's somebody defining a database as full and never taking an incremental backup. A full transaction log will stop all modification to the database server. This is usually a bad thing, and people will point and laugh. Auto-growing the transaction log is not necessarily your best friend. Why? Every time we auto-grow the transaction log, we get a new virtual log file, or set of virtual log files. This becomes problematical. I'm not going to go heavily into VLF issues here. At the very end of this, I'm going to point to my MS SQL performance blog. I don't write a lot in that. I don't write in there, hey, I'm going to Costa Rica this week, how fun. Most of what's in there are notes to myself. There's a great write-up here on VLFs. Follow it if you need it. Here's some code that I use that automatically creates all the indexes that Microsoft wants that fit into a certain category. So that's kind of what we're looking for there. There is a link to a great VLF virtual log file discussion in my blog. You're welcome to use it, follow it. Link there. I'm not going to try to write something that somebody else has. Short version is, if you are experiencing very slow write times to your log, it may not be a physical disk issue. It might be a virtual log file issue because of the way Microsoft SQL Server looks to find the right place to store your log info. So take a look, read your article, follow it. Doing a DBCC log info is an important part of your standard maintenance. Also, make sure that all your scripts are backed up. This is one of the common problems I've seen across environments in terms of a disaster readiness. When we do our restores, are we bringing in MSDB with us? Have we backed it up, and can we restore it? Have we ever tried restoring an MSDB? Are there some problems with trying to get it in? Why are we doing that? Well, we want to make sure that all the scripts that we've got running are still around. I do still keep hard copies of all the scripts that I care about. Everything from identifying how much space I'm using and reporting it back in to you name it. Have scripts ready that can perform the installation config but also all the things that you do like create encryption keys, passwords, certificates, objects, jobs, you name it, keep it someplace. Keep those scripts on a machine other than your production server. Maybe keep them on your laptop if that doesn't violate any issues with your current employer. Verify the backups. We talked about this briefly, but once again, get a separate server set aside to do periodic testing. What is periodic? I have customers who, due to regulatory reasons, are required to do this once a month. I have other customers that once a year run a test of every backup restore. My personal opinion is that if once a quarter or so you test spot check and test restore a handful of backups, handful depending on how many servers you've got and what you're able to test, that's a good rehearsal for a real disaster. It makes sure that you can do the restores. It makes sure you can get them from off-site. And it's a great exercise for junior DBAs. It's a great exercise for any operational staff that might be doing it overnight. It also helps you validate your runbooks at the same time as perform the backups. Runbooks. The Great DBA always has a runbook. What is a runbook? A runbook is the written plan for everything that you do on your server. This includes your DR plan. This includes where the backups are stored. This includes what people are to be called in case of specific types of emergency. For example, the server has a corrupt table. In order to repair the corrupt table, I want to put the database in single user mode. Who do I talk to get permission from that? If I do it arbitrarily, somebody's going to kick my butt out of that shop sooner rather than later. What if the database is corrupt and needs to be restored? Who's going to authorize that? Who's going to notify the users that things are there? Anything that you might need to do goes in that runbook. Why? Because when you're on vacation in Bora Bora, you don't want people hunting you down saying, hey, what do I do? Instead, before you leave, you can say it's all in the runbook and it has been tested by the junior DBA. The Great DBA pays attention to physical aspects of things as well. Some folks expect the storage people to take care of identifying growth and when you need more space. You as the great database administrator also want to make sure that you know how fast your databases are growing. You know how much space you need. In the olden days, this was a bigger issue because people would buy X number of 100 gigabytes, and when you hit a certain level, you needed to go tell your boss, hey, I'm going to run out of disk in about 6 months, and your boss will say, oops, I need 9 months to order disk. We're in big trouble here, and look kind of silly to his upper management or her upper management because they didn't get this information out in time. You want to find out from the higher-ups, from the hardware people, what those types of requirements are. Measure and monitor things like database growth, CPU utilization growth, network growth, memory, you name it, so that if you need to get more, you can handle it. Disk. Be aware that disk has a finite life. How finite is a finite life? Well, if there's anybody who can listen to my voice who's never experienced a disk failure, you're a very lucky person because it happens on a fairly regular basis. If you talk to the hardware manufacturers, spinning disk has a mean time between failures of about 20 to 30,000 hours. So if you do the math on that, theoretically you've got decades before a disk fails. But keep in mind that's mean time between failures. If one disk has 20,000 hours mean time between failures, then 20 disks have 1,000 hours mean time between failures because that's an average. 200 disks have 100 hours mean time between failures. So what you want to do is make sure you've got redundancy in your disk. It says here it's not important, it is critical. The reason for that is when the disk fails, everything goes down and they point to you and you say, well, it's a hardware problem. It's a very unsatisfactory answer. Next, as you're picking redundancy, you'll find that hardware manufacturers tell you, make it RAID 5, you'll get all the throughput you need. Regardless of what the hardware sales guy says, I have had a very high level of correlation between log write slowness and being on a RAID 5 device. I do like RAID 10. If you have to use RAID 5 for something, use it for your data drives, not your log drives, not your master, not your temp DB. The world does seem to be moving away from spinning disk, and the direction it's currently moving towards our flash arrays as opposed to solid-state devices. For those of you who are interested, send me a note. I can talk to you about it. If you're going to go with the flash arrays, the flash storage, some of the flash storage vendors do have some known issues. Once you hit excessive numbers of writes to the specific flash, you hit a performance cliff. Some of the flash vendors have
Jeff, we seem to have lost audio.
when I walk into a shop and I ask the DBA what kind of storage you're running on, and they just say a SAN and they don't know if it's RAID 5 or RAID 10, it's time for me to start educating that DBA about where he or she is about to get burned or can potentially get burned. DBA is a good resource when you start to design your application flow. Make sure that you go and talk to your application groups and participate in their design meetings. Software maintenance, communication, important issue. Roll out new patches as soon as you know somebody who hasn't been burnt by a patch. This refers not to, say, upgrading from 2008 to 2012. This has to do with applying things like service packs. Service Pack 2 just came out. Do I want to be the first person on the block to apply it? Well, I do know some people who I otherwise consider to be very intelligent who take every Microsoft patch and apply it as soon as it comes out. I'm not on that list. I've been burned by patches in the past. What I want to do is apply the patch to my development and/or test environments as soon as I have heard the general murmuring that the patch has been non-objectionable. I still don't want it to go into my production environment until it's certified by QA. Don't wait too long, because these patches are usually trying to resolve bug issues which you may be experiencing and not even be aware of yet. Business continuity. The Great DBA has a good handle on how important the data is to the business. I have been at shops where if they lose a full day's worth of data, they simply don't care. They'll rebuild it. Very strange situation. In other environments, a single lost transaction blows a service level agreement and breaks a contract, which can cost up in the 8 or 9 figure range. These are things you should know. Make sure you've got a long-term plan for DR, business continuity. What if you were a New Orleans-based business during Katrina? I don't know if I have any on the call. But guess what? If your building gets blown away, you need a plan that allows you to get your business up and running again within a finite, measurable period of time. Without that, the business is going under. You're not going to be able to come back and figure it out. We talked about the runbook a little bit earlier. Maintenance plans, backups, file locations, basically anything that can go wrong with the server, you want the fix for that documented in the runbook. One of the other things the Great DBA does is talk to the developers. One of the things that I find consistently in shops is that when I start looking at problems, the problems have a lot of consistency in them. We're overusing subqueries where we should be writing joins. We have a lot of functions in the where clauses. We are unindexed in very specific situations. When I go on site for a 3 to 5 day performance and tuning gig, I very often run seminars like this one, not on being a great DBA, but on indexing, on join performance, on writing CTEs, on coding practices. I find that developers have a high aptitude for coding, but they often don't have the training in database performance. When you show them what's going on, why they're having problems, why they're experiencing issues, A, they jump on it, B, they fix it in all the places you haven't found yet, and C, you don't have to deal with that problem anymore because they figure it out. I always, at new shops, offer to do lunch and learns for the developers when I'm looking at the database stuff. Finally, personality attributes of the Great DBA. The Great DBA is always learning. We always have new technologies coming out for things like flash storage. We always have new service packs coming out. We always have new tools coming out. The Great DBA is always paying attention to what's out there on the market, what's available, what's coming next, and plans for it. The Great DBA is meticulous. What I really wanted to write here was that the Great DBA is an anal retentive compulsive neurotic that makes Monk look like a slob. The reason for that is we want to make sure we never miss anything. We are frequently checklist oriented. We are frequently automating everything that can happen. The Great DBA is a constructive paranoid. We are always asking what can go wrong. We will do things like validate backups even if nobody asks us to. We will initiate these types of activities. The Great DBA doesn't want to spot check and visually check everything that's going on in all the servers that the DBA is managing. I know one person who is currently personally responsible for 1,100 servers. He couldn't spot check them if he had to. You have to automate everything, bring information back. One of the things that we do, we've got a portal that we create for our managed services customers. All the maintenance is reported, not performed, but reported back to our portal so that our customers come back and say, okay, I can see that all of these things were done. This is when they were done. This is the result set. These are the things that we kicked off as a result of a success or a failure or space or you name it. The Great DBA is communicative. This is an unusual but very important DBA trait. If you are not communicative, this is a skill that you must take on in order to be a great DBA. You need to communicate to management early and often. The server's up and running fine. Performance is great. We have patches that need to be applied. The developers are getting ready to roll something out. I do not think it has gone through an adequate test, and they won't let me review the code. We are running low on storage. Make sure that that DBA, I hear coughing in the background. Is that a cue to me to shut up? I'll come to questions in just another minute. Almost done here. The Great DBA also gets involved online, pays attention to what's going on everywhere. The Great DBA will often do the lunch and learns, train the developers, teach them things that they didn't know before, answer their questions where possible. The Great DBA is always looking to do something better. I've always said that the best IT person is a lazy IT person, and by lazy, I don't mean the person is always late to work and never does his or her tasks. What I mean is the person looks at their code and goes, man, I did this in 10 lines of code. I can do it in 1. I'm going to fix that. Because the Great DBA wants to do it a little bit better, wants to do it more efficiently, because the Great DBA knows that requirements are always increasing and never decreasing. So the more efficient we get, the better off we are. Summary. There is a lot going on behind the background. There are some great DBAs around. If you have a part-time or developer DBA, that person may need a little guidance or training. Make sure you have sufficient expertise at hand. Thank you very much for your time today. I will get to questions in just a moment. My contact information is here. I believe that the pass is going to be taking the recording of this and showing it, so you'll be able to go up and take a look at that. We do have a YouTube channel if you enjoyed the commercials that we played before I got rolling with this. We have a total of 3 commercials and another one rolling out in about a month. I think they're really funny. I have a hard time not laughing when I watch them, and I've seen them dozens of times. We also have a lot of training webinars and videos available at our YouTube channel. I mentioned earlier that my blog does have some stuff. It's not a heavily hit blog. There are entire months that I put nothing in there, but some of the stuff in there are gems. Feel free to go in there, check it out. Think I'm about done at this point. I'm going to go take a look in the chat window. I have a question.
Yeah, I'll read them off to you, Jeff.
Okay, thank you,
Thank
Sharon.
you for the great presentation. Julie has a question. I'm having issues getting the DBCC CheckDB to run since the database is over 6 terabytes in size. Will running the DBCC check table give me the same results where I can possibly do different tables on separate tables on different days?
Actually, yes, it will. The check table is a subset of the CheckDB. Do make sure you're also doing a check table on the system table. Some people leave those out. Yes, short answer is yes. Longer answer is that for the DBCCs, one of the other things you can do is dump and restore or back up and I still call it dump and load after almost 30 years. You know, back up and restore to another server and do the DBCC on the server that you restore to, because if you restore it and it's all clean, that does imply that your own data is clean. So short answer is yes.
Okay, Mai would like to know what are some good tool options?
I'd almost rather take that one offline because Dell is a sponsor here. They bought Quest and they have a suite of tools which are good. I don't want to discuss other tools when we have a sponsor here with a set of tools. Send me an email separately and I'll express an opinion. But honestly, if you have a tool, you're probably in good shape. If you are able to ask questions like, what happened this morning? I had a problem, I'd like to zero in on it. If your tool allows you to be able to zero in on it, you're in good shape. Test 2 or 3 of them out. Point them to your production environment. Look to see what the results are. Make sure none of them are having a negative performance effect on your production environment. Let them monitor each other and go from there. If you want anything more detailed, shoot me a private email. I'd be very happy to answer you. My email is up here on the screen.
Prashant would like to know, is there a way to know the size of the backup file for a database before actually taking it?
No, probably not. You can do an SP space used in the database and get an idea what the physical space utilization is, but it's really misleading because a backup will typically back up whole pages. So if you're using a half a page, it may be twice that. In addition, if you're going to be compressing, then the compression may have a very substantial reduction, if only for that reason. So I guess the short answer is no, but you can make the assumption that if I have 300 gigabytes now and 600 gigabytes tomorrow, that backup will be about twice the size.
Lewis would like to know, do you have a sample of a run book?
Run books are extraordinarily confidential because they'll have everything in there from passwords to telephone numbers. I do not have one that I can share. We do have a template that we use that I'd be willing to share. But one of the things that we've moved to is having a run book which is partially online. So in our environment, when we're managing a lot of different customer environments. So on a daily basis, I will, for every server, bring back information on every database back to our portal so that I know what databases I've got, what backups are running, how recently the backups are running, what size the databases are. I can do growth planning over time, and that ends up getting built into the online system, which is part of the run book. Also online, I will keep track of who to call for what things because I've got multiple customers and I want to make sure that for a particular customer, I know who to call for connectivity issues, who to call for server down, who to call for I need to put the database in single user mode, who is authorized to call me and ask for a database restore, or other types of work that we might perform. So if you take a look at, send me a note and ask me for a copy of the slides. I'll be happy to send them to you. the contents of the runbook, what I have here is a good start. I'd be willing to share a runbook template with you, but an existing runbook, that is unfortunately not something I could do.
Jeff, if you'll send me the slides, I'll post them along with the recording.
Fantastic. I will get those out to you this afternoon.
Great. Shema asks, I usually reorganize indexes if it's fragmented more than 30%, but I saw this online. Stop worrying about fragmentation for small tables. In fact, stop worrying about fragmentation for any table unless you know for sure that fragmentation is causing a performance issue or it has very small page counts. So which plan should I stick with?
Oh, Sharon, you're putting me up on a soapbox. There is an enormous amount of misinformation out there on the web.
I tell anybody if they see always or never in connection with performance, the site lies.
Yeah, there are a lot of people who think they're performance experts because they've well-tuned a 20-megabyte database and don't get that there are a lot of things out there that they don't get. I think you and I are about to agree that you still need to reorg the indexes. You still need to be aware of fragmentation because otherwise you end up with potential contention issues. Even a tiny table can have a contention issue if there are 1,000 people who want to update it at the same time. You need to make sure that, and that is a very common thing to do, a keys table, for example. You may have thousands of people want to update that in the same second, and if you have index fragmentation, you may end up with a lot of locking and blocking within the index levels that you didn't need before. So thank you for posing the question. Thank you for posing it the way you did so that I could make fun of the people who pontificate out on the web without really knowing what they're talking about.
Shema also asks, when you said keep a copy of a database backup at off-site locations, if I do this manually once a week, for example, in crash situations, how can I recover to the last log incremental backups if I didn't get to move it off-site yet?
I think that you're ready to answer that one as well, Sharon, and the answer to that one is you can't. What you need to do is sit down with the business owner or the CIO or whoever has the checkbook for things like backups and ask the question, given the chance that this site will go down, for example, maybe you're in Southern California near where the fires hit. Maybe you're in a flood zone. Maybe you're on an earthquake fault line. Maybe you're in a hurricane zone. The business owner will have a handle on what the chances are of a disaster occurring. Based on the chances of that disaster occurring, how much risk are you willing to accept? And what you as the DBA will do is say, here's where the risks are and here's what the ramifications are. If I have a crash and I'm only backing this up off-site every 7 days and this site fails, that means you've lost 7 days worth of data. In some companies, that means going out of business. In other companies, they say, well, we'll reconstruct that and our users will understand.
I think that's why a lot of people employ strategies like log shipping and other disaster recovery strategies like the new always-on availability groups and so forth, because then you have your log being almost continuously restored at your disaster recovery site.
Yeah, and that's also another great observation. The idea there is you need to build your backup and disaster plan based on business requirements and not based on what you've got technically. So you need to make sure that the people who are going to bear the brunt of the disaster understand what the potentials are and what some of the solutions are. Maybe when it comes down to it, they say, you know what? I will invest in an always-on pair in another site, and we will push the always-on over there, and we'll do our reporting from there. Or they'll say, you know what? I'm willing to accept the risk because I think it's extremely unlikely. Or they will give you the tools to automate sending it over daily or hourly or continually. if in fact you're going to go with something like a log shipping approach. But yeah, your comments are right on the money, and another great question. Thank you.
There's another question about the runbook template. Maybe you can send me that too, and I'll post it on the site.
I'd really rather not do that because
Okay.
it really is, it's a business confidential business work product for us because
Okay, then people have your email address. They can ask you for it.
Absolutely.
What is the difference between logical fragmentation and physical fragmentation?
I'm not sure there's a good answer for that. Physical fragmentation is when the data gets scattered across multiple pages and is not organized well on the disk. Logical fragmentation is when the layout on the disk is not necessarily bad, but the optimizer is unable to use the storage well. So the only example I can think of for a logical fragmentation issue is the virtual log file problem, where if you have too many virtual log files, you find that your write log time starts to increase crazily. Physical fragmentation is very common and is one of the reasons we need to reorder our indexes periodically.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeff. Jeff mentioned the Ola Hallengren scripts, and we did have a presentation on that topic in January. So if you're interested in pursuing that tool that he mentioned, you can look at the recording of the presentation that was done. It's on the meeting archives page at dba.sequelpass.org. And I have one last task, and then I'll thank Jeff, and we can all be on our way. This meeting's raffle winner is Kunal Mittal, kunal.mittal@dematic.com. And Kunal, the headquarters will send you your prize, and thank you for participating. And Jeff, thank you for doing this presentation for us. You and I have a lot of the same prejudices. I actually tell my students that the best DBA is a paranoid control freak.
I think we're expressing exactly the same thoughts there, Sharon.
So thank you very much, everybody. Thanks for coming, and we'll see you in 2 weeks' time. I kind of, as usual, remember who is speaking 2 weeks from now. I get through one day at a time. I'm going to end the webinar. Thanks again, Jeff. Let me know when you want to talk to us again. And